Hey folks, and welcome to today's episode titled Adam Neuman of WeWork, a great salesman or a great bullshitter. Now, the WeWork story is one that most of us are familiar with, but as you'd expect, we go deep into how Neuman was able to raise billions from some of the savviest investors and from other investors like Softbank, who, as we find out, weren't that savvy at all. What I love about this story is that as soon as I started digging, I kept on coming across facts and figures and quotes from Neuman that left me stunned. How did he get investors to fall for his spiel? We dig into Masayoshi Son, the founder of Softbank, this revered investor who makes the biggest bets and also the most reckless ones. And even if you thought you knew the WeWork story, as I myself thought, I promise there's a lot in here that will keep you in a state of disbelief. It's an incredible story. Enjoy. Morning, Keith. How are you doing?
Ori, I'm doing really well, thanks.
Today's story is WeWork, and you chose this. So what made you choose this cracker?
So I suppose I first became aware of them as sort of, visiting companies in the startup world when we had our advertising business. So, you're going to meet people who are kind of in WeWork offices and you're in the shared space. And
Yeah.
it was intriguing and fascinating. I thought this is really cool. This is really nice, good coffee, nice vibes, really nice desks, really nice spaces. And I thought as a concept, this is really cool. Then I met people who'd be kind of hot desking, to be in one office one time, one another. So I thought this is an amazing concept.
Yeah.
Then, of course, Adam Neuman himself popped up and you'd see him. And then the whole messaging got really woo-woo, sort of changing the world type stuff.
Yeah.
So I thought, this guy must be the most amazing salesman in the world. And then, of course, it all blew up. So I thought it would be a really good story to kind of dive into a little bit.
Yeah.
But I just love the concept. I didn't know much about the underpinning business, which obviously not a lot of people did until it was quite late in the day. And he was a really intriguing and engaging figure. And I thought, wow, could be a great story. So that's the interest in them there.
Yeah, and I knew a bit about it because when it all blew up, there was a lot of articles about what went wrong with WeWork. And when I dug into it then for this episode, you said salesman. I'm even thinking of titling this episode "The World's Greatest Bullshitter" because there's a difference between salesmanship, I think, and bullshit. And the more I dug into it, the more I thought, is this guy for real? And not only is this guy for real, how is he getting away with this? How is he raising all these billions? As you said, when you go into the offices, they were very, very nice. They were very different to what had been out there before. But at the same time, that's not exactly what he was selling. And that's the great thing about the story.
Yes.
He was selling it as something way more than just office space. That's why they were able to raise all these billions. And all you had to do was scratch the surface and you realize there's not a whole lot behind what he's saying here. One word or story or moral that kept on coming into my head when I was researching this was The Emperor's New Clothes.
Yeah.
It kept on coming up. I was reading what he was saying and what his investors were saying about him and going, this is just pure fiction. So he is obviously a fascinating character that he was able to do what he did and sell this story of what WeWork was about, which makes it such a great story, especially when it all
and I
comes
think and the way he extracted himself in the end, I think is an amazing story. But we can talk about that as we get to it in chronological order. But I think that's one of the standout items.
It is. And like to begin the story, we will dig into his background and how he built it. But when I was writing the article for this, I started this in 2017, which is really when they were at their height, because he was on the cover of Forbes magazine. It sort of gives our any listeners who aren't aware of WeWork, although I'd be surprised if anybody hadn't come across WeWork at some stage because it was such a big story. And I think there was the Apple series as well. We Crashed, was it with Jared Leto?
Oh, yeah.
But he was on the cover of Forbes magazine with quotes like, we're doing amazing things that no one else is doing. We are changing how and where the world does business. And he uses words like it's a physical social network. Their mission statement was elevating the world's consciousness. And he said WeWork wasn't just about renting office space. It was a movement, a revolution. It was something much, much greater. And Neuman is central to all of this. He was this charismatic, evangelical, and as I was saying in the article, it wasn't just that he was selling a business. He was selling a myth, and he sold this myth really, really successfully. And the thing about it, Keith, is you will forgive me for thinking there was only Adam Neuman in WeWork, because he did have a co-founder.
That's right, Miguel.
Miguel, who really just went into the background. And even when I was doing my research on where are they now, you couldn't find anything about Miguel McKelvey. It's all Neuman.
Well, it would be difficult not to fade into the background.
Yeah.
When you're sort of juxtaposed against somebody like Newman, I think.
Yeah. He was this very, very imposing 6'5", although Miguel McKelvey was even taller than him. Not that many helped him in any way. This 6'5" figure with long brown hair, dressed like a tech bro in expensive trainers and t-shirts and jeans, and very much came across as being at the vanguard of this new tech sector, even though they weren't a tech business at all, but we'll get into that. But his background is born in 1979 in Israel to two doctors, lived in a kibbutz for a while, then went into the army, then moved over to New York, started two very bad businesses. In fairness to Newman, he himself, I saw interviews where he joked about how crap these initial businesses were. I suppose it's easy to joke about how crap they were when you've got a few billion in the bank. But one of them was...
And were they also other people's money as well? I wonder.
I didn't see anything about the investment he got from them, but he must have got some investment. One was a retractable high heel shoe for women. And the other was a baby clothes company called Egg Baby. And their key product was crawlers, which had these pads on the knees, and the byline or the tagline was something like, even though they don't hurt, or even though they can't talk, it doesn't mean they don't hurt. So this was, I mean, it was silly ideas. But he was outgoing, ambitious. Everybody who knew him back then said that he was very, very focused on success. You know, he was driven. And McKelvey then, a different character, quieter. He was brought up in a collective of single mothers in Oregon, and he went on to become an architect. But apparently their origin story, and I'm very suspect because, you know, Neuman is just so full of it, but their origin story is that they bonded over this shared experience of growing up in these communities. And it was this shared experience and this background that gave them this kind of, you know, insight that nobody else had, this kind of superpower as to what makes a great community. And so
that smells like bullshit.
Yeah, it does. And so they formed this idea of, you know, leasing out office space. That was it, basically. A company that would rent office space, but with a communal twist. And they started out in 2010 with a company called Green Desk, which was this eco-friendly office space company in Brooklyn. They got one floor off a landlord. It was a very opportune moment. They did do very well from the get-go, because this is just 2 years after the 2008 crash. Real estate is very cheap. You got an awful lot of people coming out of 2008 without any jobs. So it led to an increase in freelancers, in startups, people starting their own companies, and just architects and self-employed people were starting moving into this space. And also college graduates were seeing self-employment, freelancing as a viable career opportunity. So there was growing demand for this sort of flexible month-to-month office space. So Green Desk did very well, but they had huge ambitions. Neuman was massively ambitious. He wanted to expand into Manhattan. So they sold Green Desk. They said they sold it back to their landlord for $3 million, which seems like a big amount of money, I thought, for what was a very, very small business back then. I couldn't verify whether it was true or not. And they started WeWork with this distinct space that it wouldn't be just a place to work. It would be vibrant communities. Neuman called this a capitalist kibbutz, mixing commerce with community. And again, harken back to why we should be very circumspect about anything that Neuman says. In their origin story, they said that, you know, they pitched it to a lot of Manhattan landlords and that they were getting the cold shoulder until they came across Joel Schreiber, this landlord who, after a 3-hour lengthy meeting, eventually gave him 15 million quid, just like that, for a 30% stake. And Schreiber said, I didn't negotiate. I said yes. I loved Adam's energy. And that was a story that's carried throughout in Hulu documentary, in every article I read. That was sort of a given. But I started digging into Joel Schreiber just because I was interested. I thought, my God, if he got 30% of the company for 15 million, how much did this guy earn in the end? How much did he cash out? So I dug around and I came across a few articles that had very interesting, history on Joel Schreiber. He was a controversial character, ruffled an awful lot of feathers, and within the articles, Schreiber himself admitted that he only ended up giving 1 to 2 million to WeWork. Despite, and even though he said this publicly and in these articles he said it, Neuman continued with the narrative that they got 15 million from Joel Schreiber. Now, apparently, Schreiber had about 1% of the company at the time of IPO. That's the best figure I could get, which still would have been a hefty sum if he managed to cash out. But again, it just shows that, as with anything Neuman says, you have to be take it with a pinch of salt, really.
I suppose that helped their valuation as well. I suppose if they said it was 30% was 15 million, then it's a much better story for investors thereafter. Maybe that's what was motivating
it. It does, and it also feeds into this narrative of Neuman being this fantastic visionary that, you know, he goes in, meets a landlord, and without even doing any due diligence, the landlord just slaps down 15 million and says, there you go, because I believe in you, Adam. That kind of stuff. I mean, as you can tell, I'm very anti Neuman, but not just him. I'm very anti the people who bought into his shtick, because I'm looking at them kind of going, what were you up to? But anyway, let's look at the business model. So the business model was simple but effective. They created spaces with, it must be said, as you even testified, an irresistible draw for the target market.
Oh, they're very cool. Very cool.
That's it. They were saying like this industrial chic aesthetic with it, like exposed brickwork, open areas, comfy couches, cool murals, and piped-in music. And an aspect that I came across all the time in the articles is the free beer. Did you come across the beer?
No free beer. No.
Yeah, I think that might be just in the American ones. Free-flowing beer. Alcohol was a huge element of the whole WeWork culture. But the basis behind it was very simple. Make work more enjoyable and improve productivity. And they were...
Yeah, and there was this sense that, you know, it could sort of encourage serendipity. You could just bump into another person and, you know, innovation would flourish as a result.
And you know, in my research, so, I mean, at the start, this is a quote from an architect who had a desk there. And she said, I have to say the vibe there is magnetic. People are chatting in small groups or having coffee and working on a laptop. This energy, this magnetic, productive buzz is what she testified to. So, I mean, they did get some of that vibe going, I guess.
I guess the other side of it is, though, if you're maybe a grumpy old man like me, if people on either side of you are focused on their business with headphones on, having loud conversations about something that's nothing to do with your business.
Yeah.
And it's like, Jesus Christ, give me some space.
There was a lot of that. I get the feeling that it was really, you know, for young people. I guess that, you know, a 40-year-old, you know, accountant, you know, trying to crunch his numbers would not like that whole vibe going on. So it's very much for the young people, this whole free beer and comfy couches and every mixing and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it wouldn't be my cup of tea at all. And they were charging anything from $45 a month for a temporary desk to $220 a month for a more permanent hot desk, and up to $22,000 for up to 50 employees. And in later years, larger businesses did start getting taking space in WeWork offices, but at the start it was mainly freelancers and startups. And it was fresh and it was exciting, and people will say that, you know, when Google and Facebook and tech companies were doing this years beforehand, they were, but this was the first time really that startups managed to experience that kind of, you know, open space, arcades, pool tables, that kind of vibe.
Yeah. And the sign-in experience with a little iPad mini and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, yeah,
and,
sure.
You know, you're having your face scanned, all that sort of crap.
Yeah,
you know?
the technology that Nueman went on about, that's one thing that we're going to dig into. But the thing about it is that for all its coolness and all its vibes, there's no USP here. There was nothing here that couldn't be copied. and they weren't unique. There was people in this space for many years that we are going to dig into as well. So it was a very easy thing to copy, and competitors did copy it. But Neuman, what Newman's trick was in convincing everyone that it was much more than that. He really fought against this idea that they were just a real estate office rental company. And his pitch was, he'd go into the pitch like, this is what he'd say. How do you change the world? He'd ask. His answer, bring people together. Where is the easiest big place to bring people together? In the work environment. So he was talking about changing the world. That's how he framed it all the time. And he used various various terms to make WeWork seem much more than it was. He'd call it a tech company. He'd call it a platform, a physical network, or an operating system, layering additional streams of revenue, saying that, oh no, we're like a physical operating system, and we're going to be able to sell insurance and software and all these additional services to our customers. And his bullshit was infectious, because here's a quote from their CFO, who says, we frankly are in our own category. We use real estate and services to empower our community. And they use an awful lot of this kind of fluffy language to boost the company, which, looking back, and it's not just with hindsight, if anybody started talking to me like that about their business, I'd say, look, just give me your numbers, man. Tell me how much you're making and how much you're going to make and where your ROI is coming from, what your bottom line is. Don't give me this bullshit about empowering your community.
Because empowering community sounds charitable, Max.
I know.
It's like a higher mission.
Yes. Oh, this is all that they were all about. We're much more than just, a pure real estate play. We're here to, make people better, make the world better. But the simple fact of it was that it was a company that had to charge members more than it paid its landlords. And it was dependent on a thriving office rental market, which itself is dependent on a strong economy. And anybody, you don't have to be a savvy investor to know that real estate is one of the most cyclical businesses in the world.
Yeah.
And that's all it was. So, of course, to grow, they had to get a lot of money. They initially got 7 million from friends and family, because it should be noted that Newman's wife, Rebecca, who will be talked about a little bit in the episode, was the first cousin of Gwyneth Paltrow. So they moved in affluent circles, and they managed to raise the 7 million from those friends and family, but they needed a lot more money. So in 2012, they pitched to Benchmark, a very well-known venture capital firm. And they convinced them, as we talked about, that WeWork was more than the sum of its parts. That when he was called up on, this is funny, when Benchmark called him up on his valuation and saying, but hey, Adam, you're only leasing 3 buildings at the moment. Adam said, what do you mean? I have hundreds of buildings. They're just not built yet. Oh, Jesus Christ. And they fell for it. As they said, they weren't really investing in the business at this stage. They were investing in him, because this is the quote from Bruce Dunleavy, the partner with Benchmark. He said, let's give him some money and he'll figure it out. So they gave him $17 million at a valuation of $100 million. And then over the next few years, as they needed more money, they got $150 million from JP Morgan in 2014, valuing them now at $1.4 billion. In 2016, they got $430 million from a Chinese VC firm, valuing them at $16 billion. And the reason why they were able to do this, you're kind of going, because, people were going to bring it into comparison with another company that had been around and doing exactly as WeWork had been doing for over 20 years. And this valuation of $16 billion was way too high. And it's because he was using the tech startup playbook. It was an idea of grow fast, acquire as many users, or in this case, tenants as you can, and worry about profitability later. And as we said, he was very, very good at selling it. He was charismatic. He was energetic. And it wasn't just employees. He even had the likes of Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon, as far as I'm concerned, is, probably top of the tree in terms of financial know-how and sensibility. I've read numerous books on the 2008 crash and how JP Morgan got through it. And a lot of it comes down to how Jamie Dimon is this steady hand who just, doesn't lose the head. But he came out after they invested in WeWork and said, it's a hybrid hospitality and tech company that's entirely different from anything in real estate. Again, notice the tech. Walter Isaacson. I mean,
Oh my God.
he compared it to Steve Jobs. He said, like Steve Jobs and other great entrepreneurs, he knows how to connect the humanities with business and technology. So you've got these stalwarts, people who I would normally look up to as much as you look up to some of these people, but just kind of think, okay, well, these guys have a bit of sense. And they're all lavishing praise. So obviously, Neuman in company, because I've watched videos and I'm not swayed by him, but obviously in company, he must have had some
Charismatic,
some sort of
engaging.
yeah,
Yeah.
there must be something there, because both Diamond and Isaacson talk about the tech. So obviously he sold them on the tech. And this is another quote from them, from WeWork. They said, landlords just sell aluminium. We make iPhones. So you're kind of thinking, okay, so these guys must be doing some amazing technology stuff if you've got all these people buying into them, valuing them as a tech startup. But they didn't. Like there was nothing there technology-wise. The Forbes magazine that I mentioned at the start, they talked about, this is a real puff piece, they talked about complex technology and logistics systems for optimizing space. But companies like IWG that we'll talk about, they've been refining space optimization for decades. There was nothing new there. This is what was in the article as well to kind of exemplify their technology. They talked about laptops and touchscreens wired to doors, adjustable desks that could be adjusted with the swipe of a card. And they even talked about soundproof phone booths that have adjustable lighting and temperature. I can't go, what the hell? Like, this is just shiny window dressing. There's nothing. They talked about their ability to collect and analyze data to inform optimal design and a breakthrough. And this is no bullshit. In the article that Forbes said to highlight how good they were using their technology and how much they were more than just a real estate company, the guy who was analyzing data said they had a breakthrough. They realized that customers liked desks that were seated beside windows. That's what their data informed them. So, like, they also created an internal social media platform so that all the people in WeWork could, be on this one social media platform. It totally flopped, kind of a LinkedIn. Nobody used this.
Yeah.
And the Wall Street Journal, the Harvard Business Review then did an analysis of WeWork and how it was claiming to be a tech company. And they said the criteria for a tech startup or any tech company should have network effects, low capital requirements, low customer acquisition costs, and the ability to scale quickly. WeWork didn't check
None of those.
And nor did it have any technology, proprietary technology, that disrupted any sector in any way. It was...
And it's all CapEx as well, pretty much.
Massively CapEx. Massively CapEx. And the fabrication just didn't extend to the technology. They also used to do what they called internally was activate the space. And that's whenever Neuman was bringing investors around their WeWork building, Neuman would get all the employees down into the lobby. They'd start drinking margaritas. They'd start playing pool. It was all a fabrication to make it seem like it was this huge, vibrant workplace. So he even fabricated that side. Now, I'd give him a break. I mean, that's probably a bit of, salesmanship, and people will do that. But the whole tech side of it was pure, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I can remember designing with the iPad, and I thought that was cool.
Yeah, a lot of cool stuff.
I remember the little phone booths and stuff like that, but that was just
dressing,
common sense.
Yeah, just
if you wanted to have a private conversation, you didn't want everybody to overhear.
Yeah,
but you wouldn't call any of that technology. They're just
little add-ons,
labor-saving devices or add-ons. There's no core proprietary IP there.
No, and just like the pipe music and the nice murals, they all add to the atmosphere and they all make it seem a bit cool. But there's nothing, there's no underlying or proprietary technology or disruptive technology in any way. That's what he was selling, and that's what the people were buying into. Again, savvy investors putting billions in on this basis. They also talked about their culture, and this is what Neuman said. He said, culture is our intellectual property. And it wasn't just to promote culture internally, it was also a selling point. We talked about the We operating system. He used culture as something that they would also sell to prospective tenants, saying that we're not just going to optimize office space here, we're also optimizing your company culture. But again, you dig down into it. Like, if you're going to say that you're a tech company, have some technology. If you're going to say that your culture is your intellectual property, have something to back it up. They didn't have anything to back it up. They did have a purpose, and an awful lot of people bought into that purpose, that they were changing the way people work. But really, the only thing in one of the articles that I read, they said their only intellectual property in terms of culture was alcohol, because they actively promoted alcohol like no other company that they ever came across. They had beer on tap. They had posters all over the wall encouraging people to meet up for. Nueman himself had this tequila called Don Julio 1942. It was a very expensive bottle of tequila. And every time there was a business success, whether he was with a landlord or a business partner or with employees, there was shots of tequila all around. Drinking was very much part of the culture. They'd have a mandatory Monday night event called Thank God It's Monday. Mandatory, everybody had to attend, where Neuman would go up on stage and talk about how great they were and talk about this movement they were creating. And that was also followed by shots. And then they'd have a yearly annual event. The summer camp is what it was called. I don't know.
Yeah.
Did you see the Hulu documentary?
I did. Not the. Was it Hulu?
But I saw
thought it's or HBO.
It could be HBO. I'm not too sure. But it was.
I did. I saw this really odd sort of social event where people were really pumped up and
Yes.
overexcited, and it was cultish weird.
Very cultish. They started off that shot of the summer event with just drinking, loads of drinking, people going nuts, getting drunk, and alcohol was free and it was everywhere. But then you're right, then there was these events, and again the summer camp was mandatory. People had to attend, and there was people in that documentary who said, I wasn't comfortable with the alcohol, I wasn't comfortable with the cult-like feel, and I expressed that to HR and said I didn't want to go, and HR said, tough, you got to go. Not only did they have to go, they were also given bracelets that they could be tracked on, so that the organisers could enforce them. In other words, you had to attend these talks that Adam gave, and Adam and his wife would stand on stage for hours on end talking about how great their marriage is, and also talking about how they intended to save the world and solve the problem of orphanages around the world. And also at one stage, Adam said that he kind of half jokingly, that he could become the president of the world. So it was very cult-like. And you're right, in that documentary, you saw the intensity of the people and the belief that they had, and it did seem a bit off.
And some of them are very young and,
Yes.
and innocent, who felt exploitative in some respects.
Yeah, and they were exploited, Keith, because in the research it all just showed that an awful lot of these young people were working 60 to 70 hours a week, which you'd understand. They were working for low pay as well, because they bought into this.
They're saving the world.
Yes, this vision that Neuman was promoting, but there was also huge turnover because they were working so hard, and also there were stories that Neuman was intending to cut up to 20% of the workforce every year. And this is a quote from one person. He said, "When you're at WeWork, there's a certain lack of culture, which is ironic for a company selling culture. If there is a culture, it's that of a revolving door." So again, if you're going to set yourself up as culture as your intellectual property, you need to have a lot more behind it than just, we go to summer camp once a year, and in actual fact, you're forced to go. We have a Monday night session where Adam spouts out about how great they are, and you're forced to go. And we also have loads of alcohol. There needs to be a bit more to it than that. But, despite our criticisms, WeWork continued to grow. In 2017, had 163 locations in 52 cities, 150,000 members. It had revenue of 886 million, so that's all good, except that 886 million revenue was balanced by an $883 million loss. So they were nearly losing $1 for every dollar that they were spending. But they managed to keep on raising investment, and part of this is due to the markets back then, because if you look back on, say, the likes of Amazon, when they started up, they'd raise one round of funding, and then they'd usually go to the IPO. That was the norm. But since the 2000s, that's kind of changed. Facebook were able to do 6 rounds before they did an IPO, and the reason is they didn't need to, because after the 2008 crash, the 2008 crash was a lot to answer for in terms of all the things that happened after. But there was a sluggish market. There was increased, so people weren't investing really in the market. There was also increased regulation. which meant that there was the IPO was less appealing. There was low interest rates, which meant that borrowing was cheap. So you had all these poor private investors, not poor, I mean poor in that you feel sorry for them because they were sitting on this enormous amounts of cash and they didn't know what to do with them. So they started investing in the most ridiculous companies. And people remember loads of what was called D2C companies back then, like Dollar Shave Club or Casper, the mattress company. Yeah. That raised over 340 million. It's now worth 260 million. WAG, this one. WAG was a dog walking app, right? It raised $300 million. It's now worth about 700 million. Does Theranos, that raised 700 million. Quibi, the video sharing company, was set up by Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman. That raised,
the short form video,
that raised 1.75 billion. So there was tons of private equity or private money around, and they started investing in all these internet startups or tech startups, but not for more tech at all.
And what was the general property market like at this time? I mean, was there cheap property to be swept up by the guys? Or
well, initially there was, in 2010, I would say up to maybe about, I don't know exactly when the property market would have started increasing, but I'm guessing the economy itself was on the way up back then. So when the economy is up, I'm guessing, and as we'll dig into the investment that WeWork got, and then the prices they started having to pay to get property, I think that the real estate market was making a recovery because, as we said, the real estate market is cyclical. So it's down, it goes up, and then it'll go down again, as sure as night follows day. But out of all the bad investments and companies that private money went into, WeWork, why we're doing a story on WeWork is because WeWork stood out as being the worst of them all in terms of the amount of money it raised and how it all fell apart. And the big move for WeWork was when, I'll try and get his name right, Masayoshi Son entered the fray. We'll call him Masa because everybody calls him Masa.
Yeah, he's the sort of enigmatic CEO of Softbank.
Yeah, and I think we will do a story. We'll have to do a story on him someday because he's very interesting. Did a little bit of research on him just to give our listeners a feeling for who this guy is. So he was born into poverty in Japan. He moved to California when he was just 16 and he started up a company called Softbank, which started doing software distribution but then diversified into tech publication, and it floated in 1994 with a valuation of $3 billion. So on the back of that, Masa then had a lot of money. And what sets Masa apart from everyone else was his willingness to take massive bets or invest massive amounts, whichever way you want to put it. But he really shook up. If you're talking about disruption, Masa did disrupt the venture capital business in a big way. I read a book, I just finished actually when I was researching this, by Sebastian Malaby, and it's a book on venture capital. And he gives a big section of it to Masa and shows how Masa really disrupted the VC world. He started in 1995 with Yahoo. He came in gave half to a $5 million funding of Yahoo. But then he came back 4 months later to the Yahoo guys and said, I want to give you $100 million for a 30% stake. This was the largest minority stake ever given in Silicon Valley. And he also increased the value of Yahoo by 8-fold within 4 months by just making that offer. And the Yahoo guys and their head investor, who was Michael Moritz from Sequoia Capital, who also showed up in the PayPal episode, they didn't really want to take it because they were all on for going for an IPO. But Masa said to them, he said, write down your two biggest competitors. And they wrote down Excise and Lycos. And he said, right. He said, if I don't invest in Yahoo, I'll invest in Excise and I'll kill you. So in other words, and at that time, $100 million going into Excise would have given them a huge advantage over Yahoo. So he basically just threatened them.
Blackmailed them.
Don't take my money, grand. I'll give it to your competitor. And that'll be the end of you. So they took the money. I think they still went and did the IPO. They did a deal whereby they said, okay, we'll take your money, but we'll still do the IPO. But it gave Masa a huge stake in a company. Well, it was still a minority stake, but at its height, Yahoo was worth $110 billion. Given his $100 million investment, worth $33 billion at the height.
Wow.
At the height. So Masa then continued to invest during the dot-com boom. He invested a total of 1.7 billion in 100 startups. His MO was to bet big, bet early, and let the founders run the show. This was a big difference as well. It wasn't just the amount of money he gave to companies. It was his hands-off approach that really shook up the VC world, because up to then, an awful lot of the time, VCs will put money into a company, either move the founders over to the side and bring in their own management, or else have an awful lot of oversight anyway over the business.
Yeah, the board.
Exactly. But this hands-off approach really led to the emergence of the likes of Larry Page and Serge Brin and Zuckerberg, where they had outsized voting power. Peter Thiel was also very heavily influenced in this. He goes even further than Masa. He believes that the biggest payouts come from real outliers, and that the outliers, you got to just, don't interfere at all. Do nothing at all. Just give them the money and let them go wild with it. And you'll lose some, but you'll win one or two big ones, and they'll more than make up for the whatever ones you haven't lost. And it's an interesting concept, but as we shall see here, I think that the sweet, as we shall see here, it doesn't work out. The sweet spot usually is somewhere in the middle, because we mentioned Google. Google did bring in Eric Schmidt, and Larry Page and Serge Brin. They were still very much involved, but they moved to the side and let Eric Schmidt scale the business. Zuckerberg brought in Sheryl Sandberg and very much leaned on her, I suppose. Wasn't that her book as well?
Yeah, that's Lean In. And she was an incredible hire, really.
She was. And I think that's I don't believe this. You should let the founders, go nuts, because as you shall see here, they will go nuts. You need a bit of a balance. Sure, you need the founders, I think, still in there. You need their vision and their drive behind it, but you need that balanced a little bit.
But mistakes are expensive to make for the first time.
Yes.
So why not bring in somebody who's done it?
Yeah.
I mean, Sheryl Sandberg, great track record, same with Eric Schmidt.
Yeah. But anyway, so there was Masa investing in the dot-com bubble, but of course it burst, and he lost 90% of his personal wealth after that. But he survived mainly due to a late investment he made just before the bubble burst in 2000. He put 20 million into Alibaba, and over the course of 2000 to 2015, that netted them about 72 billion altogether. I think he sold his last stake in that in around 2023. So with that, he was still able to invest throughout the 2000s. And he invested, Softbank got into everything. They got into internet companies, but also baseball teams, robotics. They bought Vodafone Japan. They brought out their own mobile phones. And then he really catapulted himself center stage again in 2016 when he launched the Vision Fund. This was the biggest tech fund ever, 100 billion, 45 billion from Saudi Arabia, 15 billion from the UAE Health Fund, 28 billion from Softbank gave themselves, and then Apple were also an investor, and there was a few others. And their strategy was Masa's strategy was blitzscaling, and this is invest huge amounts of money into what they called disruptive tech companies, so that these companies can then dominate the market and also give the founders unprecedented control. And like overall, my assessment, as I said, we're going to dig into Masa. We will do an episode on Masa. He had some massive wins. There is that. And I mean, the whole VC business, when I read Spasio Maladi's book, it is founded on the fact that, you're going to hit some home runs, and those home runs are going to be so massive that they'll more than make up for some of the investments that don't work out. But I get the idea from Masa. I'm not seeing a very skilled investor. I think he gets caught up in an awful lot of the hype, because we could see that with the dot-com bubble. He just a very scattergun approach with very little oversight, and maybe one or two of the big bets do win, but when you lose and when they don't all work out, you lose big time, as he did in the dot-com bubble. And the Vision Fund, Keith, I mean, they put 300 million into WAG. They put 380 million into a company called Get Around. I think it was a car rental company. That's now worth 4 million. They put 1.1 billion into a company called View Inc. that made smart glass. That's worth less than $1 million now. And not even their investments, their divestments. In 2019, they sold their 4.9% stake in NVIDIA for 3.6 billion. If they had held on to that, it'd be worth 160 billion now. So a lot of stupid mistakes. And in 2023, the Vision Fund reported a $32 billion loss. So, like
My
his
God.
track record, I remember reading articles throughout the last few years, and they nearly talk of Massa as this messianic figure.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
this guy, you know, has, you know, if you
The
can,
Midas touch.
the Midas touch, if Massa gets involved, you know, your goals, that's it, you're made. And then you're reading his track record, and you're kind of saying, yeah, he makes the biggest bets, but it doesn't seem to come through. It doesn't seem to work out well for him in the end, you know. And WeWork was his biggest and definitely most infamous. And again, oh man, the bullshit that surrounds this.
So he was late for meeting Neuman,
This is
wasn't he?
the famous
They'd
12-minute
only a couple of
pitch.
minutes. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to read the quote. In my mind, this sounds like something off the fucking Karate Kid. So this is Massa to Nueman. He says, in a fight, who wins, the smart guy or the crazy guy? Nueman answered, crazy guy. Massa smiled and said, you are correct, but you and Miguel are not crazy enough. Make it 10 times bigger than your original plan. If you think in that manner, the valuation is cheap. It can be worth a few $100 billion. And you're kind of going, yeah, I mean, if you want to think and project without any reasoning, without any foundation, without any reality, you can put any value on any fucking business. Like, it's just nonsense.
But you walk in there and you think, these guys aren't crazy enough.
Yes. Yes.
It's just, you meet out of the Neuman and listen to him for even 12 minutes and think,
Yeah.
this guy just isn't crazy enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Go crazier. And here's 4.5 billion, which is what he gave after that 12-minute pitch there and then. It wasn't like weeks later after negotiations. There and then after that 12-minute pitch. And I think Adam Neuman did travel in his limo. And it was while they were driving in the limo to wherever Massa was going next, some planet somewhere. He invested 4.5 billion in WeWork, valuing it as 29 billion. So altogether now by this stage, WeWork had 6.9 billion raised. And Massa gave him no guidance at all other than they agreed that 1.4 billion would go into expansion in Asia, in Japan, China, and Asia overall. So that was it. And okay, so we're going 20 billion. That's crazy. So you got to give it some context then. Why are we saying 20 billion is crazy? And the reason why it's so crazy is because WeWork wasn't the first short-term office rental company in the world. Far from it. There was a company called Regus, which was a trailblazer in the 90s.
Yeah.
An actually fast company in the 90s called Regus, the office of the future, and highlighted its efforts to foster community. The dot-com bubble burst the company, and it was saddled with high fixed costs, and it went into bankruptcy. And Mark Dixon, who was their CEO and continues to be their CEO, he said at the time, if you expand too rapidly at any one point in the market, that can catch you. So he learned a valuable lesson, and he continued to build up Regus, which was renamed IWG in about 2017 or 2016. And he continued to build it up. And as he saw WeWork growing as well, he also copied a lot of what WeWork was doing, you know, making it cooler and all that. But let's look at the numbers in terms of, this is in 2017, WeWork, or IWG versus WeWork. IWG had 3,000 locations. WeWork had 163. Now, WeWork added a lot more in 2017, but this is at the time of the 20 billion valuation. IWG had 2.5 million customers. WeWork had 150,000. Revenue per member, both of them averaged about $8,000 per desk. But IWG, the value of it per desk was $5,600 was the value it put on each desk. The value of each desk in WeWork was $135,000, even though they were both making $8,000 off each desk each year. Revenue, IWG had earned 2.8 billion and a profit of 185 million. WeWork, as we said, 886 million and a loss of 803 million. IWG also owned a lot of their buildings, giving them long-term stability, whereas WeWork relied on long-term leases backed by short-term rental agreements, really risky. And the valuation, IWG was valued at 3.7 billion and WeWork was valued at 20 billion. So in nearly every aspect, IWG is bigger, massively bigger, massively more profitable, massively more stable. And yes, WeWork has this.
But it doesn't have the sprinkle of fairy dust from Neuman and the technology spin.
This is it. This is it. But see, it wasn't. See, what we're mistaken, Keith, here is that we're stupidly valuing companies based on revenue and based on business model. Whereas what we should have been doing, as Neuman says, and I'll quote,
On the future potential or something.
it's even better than that, Keith. It's even better. Our valuation and size today are much more based on our energy and spirituality than it is on a multiple of our revenue. I just want to read it again, because you really have to imagine you an investor, and this is the guy. He's saying, no, you shouldn't be valuing us on revenue. Our valuation and size today are much more based on our energy and spirituality. So that's how you should value our company. Spirituality.
I think I'll use that if I want to get a new mortgage or
I think
something.
so. But you'd probably need to grow about a foot taller and grow your hair a bit longer, and then you might have a chance. It was, look, I got in my notes here, and I've said it before. It is a classic case of the Emperor's New Clothes, except in the Emperor's New Clothes, there's only one boy pointing at him saying he's got no clothes on. And with Neuman and with WeWork, there were articles throughout their growth, not just one voice, numerous articles, numerous publications, even the puffiest piece, the Forbes article, that were pointing out that at its core, WeWork is just an office rental space.
Yeah.
That's it. And at its core, despite all the technology, there's nothing behind it. This is a quote from the Wall Street Journal. At this time, this was with hindsight. This was while it was getting all these accolades, all this hype. The Wall Street Journal said, how can an infrastructure-dependent real estate venture scale like a low-overhead software startup? How can a company that signs 15-year leases but sells multi-memberships expect to survive a downturn? So, it wasn't as if, nobody was pointing out the flaws in WeWork system. They were. And it really leaves you scratching your head thinking, what were the investors thinking?
And was this timing, and I'm trying to think back, was it around the time sort of Uber and Airbnb where everything was being shared?
Yes.
Was it around that time?
It was. And Masa and Softbank were a big investor in Uber as well. And
that's interesting.
Yes. And what Sebastian Malady says in his book on venture capital, because of this big shift with private investors, the likes of the VC firms, the likes of Benchmark, who get in early, their share is obviously whittled down. Their 17 million share, they still had a nice piece and they made a lot of money, I'm sure, from it at some stage. But because their shares are whittled down, their voices are whittled down. They had very, very little input. And I had quotes that I came across for Bruce Dunleavy where he said, yeah, we tried to stop an awful lot of this, but he said, we didn't have the power. By this stage, there was so much money gone in, their power was whittled down. Adam Neuman wasn't listening to them. So it was all this private investment that whittled down the normal, that whittled down the investment and the power of the venture capitalists who normally would have had a more steadying approach and would be able to or kick the VC or the CEO into line and start to say, cop on here. But they weren't able to. And that happened with Uber as well, where, what's his name? Travis Kalanick. Yeah. Where he lost the run of himself because he was allowed to. The VCs didn't have the power.
Maybe there's this whole culture of business models being reinvented and democratized, and I'm just trying to see if I can thread some sort of line of.
Well, there obviously was, and I think that's probably partly where the hyped overvaluations came from, because people probably thought, no, we're in this new era. This is a different.
The sharing economy.
Yeah.
That's what it was called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So go crazy, as Masa told Neuman to do, and he did. He rebranded the company the We Company, and he gave them a new mission statement, and their new mission statement was to elevate the world's consciousness. So that's what they were doing. And as part of this expansion, they diversified into various companies or various other areas. There was WeWork, obviously. Then there was WeLive, and then there was WeGrow. So WeLive was this loftily presented communal living design idea, which was set up, as they said, to foster connection and combat loneliness. And
Oh gosh.
they were these apartments that had hot tubs out in the balconies. They had a communal kitchen with a chef. They had a laundry room, a pool room. But as WeWork quickly found out, it was far more complex than managing office spaces because you had these legal regulations, you had to manage tenant relationships. It wasn't as easy as they thought. They projected that they'd have 69 locations by 2018. They ended up opening only 2. So it took a lot of resources, and it took a lot of, I suppose, a lot of their attention away from what they should be doing, their core area of expertise. They also launched We Grow. This was the brainchild of Newman's wife, Rebecca, who we're going to talk about in a second. And the idea behind this was to unleash every child's superpowers. And the curriculum included farming, meditation, coding, entrepreneurship, spirituality, and holistic education. And you'd get all that for a nice price of $36,000 annually for preschool age children, or $42,000 annually for kids up to 11 years of age.
Oh Lord.
And suffice to say, it flopped. Now, again, I'm trying to be fair. Of the parents who sent their kids there, they had nothing positive but positive things to say about it. But it flopped spectacularly because who's going to pay that to send your kids to a school that's been run by Rebecca Neuman? And I'm going to dig in just very slightly into Rebecca Neuman because by this stage in 2017, Keith, she was down as a co-founder.
She was very prominent. Yeah.
She was down as a co-founder. Now, I am going to say that I think she was treated harshly because she was very much a lightning rod because she was into spirituality and she's very easy to pick on. And people would point to a podcast she went on where she discouraged people from eating sad animals because if you eat sad animals, you'll absorb their energy. She also made employees very uncomfortable during one of the summer retreats where on stage she said, and I quote, "A big part of being a woman is to help men manifest their calling in life." So look, it's easy to pick on her. And as I said, I thought she was treated harshly because I don't think it was her fault that she was there. I think the problem here is that she should never have been at the top of the company. What this really showed, it symbolized the nepotism and the lack of corporate oversight that plagued WeWork. She should never have been in that position. And when she was elevated to that position, it made it very easy for the press and the media to point at WeWork and say, look at all that's wrong with WeWork. But what was wrong with WeWork was far, far deeper than Rebecca Neuman and her spirituality. And then they also had they diversified into a gym thing called Rise with We. This was headed by Newman's brother-in-law. They also invested in a company called Wave Garden. They were going to start up indoor surfing. They were also going to do WeSail, which is WeWork out in the ocean on ships. And they were going to launch WeBank as well, a financial services company of some sort. I'm not too sure.
Oh Lord.
So they were all over it. And in fairness, Masa said, here's 4.5 billion, go crazy. And Nueman went crazy with us.
So did they sit around rooms and say, what crazy shit can we come up with now?
I suppose after a few shots of tequila, yeah. And that's the kind of crazy shit you come up with. Now, in his defense, Neuman would say that because they were expanding at such a huge rate and that they were buying all these materials and designing it at bulk, that they were making real savings. And that's only partly true, but because of the pressure they had to expand and they had these huge goals, they were very, very vulnerable to inflated costs, and they made desperate decisions because landlords were seeing WeWork coming to them, desperate to get property because they had these huge targets with 4.5 billion in the bank, and the landlords are saying, all right, yeah, you can have my building, but they put an inflated cost on it, and WeWork would eventually give in because they were so desperate to get the buildings.
And a huge long-term commitment, obviously, as well.
Wait till you hear about the commitments they made, but we'll get onto that when we get to the IPO. They doubled brokers' commissions to 20% of a year's rent, twice the industry average. They started sending emails out to people who were in competitors' buildings, offering to buy them out of their existing contracts and give them a year's free rent in WeWork. And savvy renters then started gaming the system. They'd go into one WeWork building for a year for free, and then moved to another WeWork building for a year for free. And because there was so much chaos going on, WeWork weren't being able to track what was going on here. So you had people who could go into a WeWork building for up to 2 years, rent free.
Nice.
Yeah, and it was chaos, and that's a quote from one of the people involved, one of the executives in WeWork. He said, "It wasn't just hyper growth; it was chaos growth. So it was just chaotic. They were burning through money, Keith." The Financial Times in 2017 or 18, they leaked a report that showed that WeWork made 1.8 billion, but lost 1.9 billion. And they were spending $100 million a week. So
My God.
when you have that kind of money going out of your bank, you need a lot more. Even that 4.5 billion isn't going to last long. And so in late 2018, Softbank committed another 3 billion, and they also were in discussions to invest 16 billion the following year to take half ownership of WeWork. But then the turning point came on Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve 2018, Masa phoned Neuman. Neuman was on holidays with his family. And when I read this story, I was thinking, why the hell did he ring him on Christmas Eve with news that they were pulling out of the deal? Could he not have waited a few days and at least let Neuman and his family in?
Seems cruel, yeah.
He rang him on Christmas Eve to say that because the stock market was looking a bit shaky and because his investors were skittish about real estate, so thereby an acknowledgement that, hey, you're a real estate company, they weren't going to go ahead with the 16 billion. Eventually, they ended up putting 1 billion in, and they also did a 1 billion share buyback from employees. But despite that, despite them pulling out, by 2019, it was valued at 47 billion. At this stage, IWG, a company far, far bigger, far well run, was worth 3.85 billion. So IWG's valuation had gone up slightly, so I'm guessing the real estate market was going well, but WeWork's valuation of 47 billion was just nuts. And
so then they decide, let's IPO?
Well, you know what? They had to, because when Softbank pulled out of the 16 billion funding, they had to go.
Cash.
Yeah, and the reason why companies don't like going to IPO, there was a great quote from Mark Beinoff, I don't have it now, in Salesforce, but what he's basically saying is that the IPO is the ultimate kind of, I suppose, test of how you are as a company, because you have to put everything out there. You have to put out
everything's disclosed.
Yes,
yeah.
Everything's disclosed, and that's why an awful lot of a company like WeWork didn't want to go IPO. They would have loved if Softbank had given them that 16 billion and they could avoid doing this, because now they had to put up all their accounting, all their facts and figures, their revenue, their strategy for growth. It was all up for scrutiny. And they put up their S1 filing, which is the document, in August 2019. And in my notes, I just have, it is a complete shit show, because while many questions were raised over the years by various media outlets, this now had all their flaws condensed into one document. But even before you sort of got into the facts and figures, Keith, that we're going to get into, the disbelief and ridicule that came about because of the actual design of the document, because Rebecca Neuman, on reviewing the document, felt that there was too many facts and figures, and as she said, business speak in the S1 filing. And an S1 filing is just a black and white document with facts and figures. That's what it's meant to be. But she thought there was too much of that in there. So she spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and put in 37 pages of a fashion shoot into the S1 filings.
Oh my God.
So even before people got to the facts and figures, I'm sure they were looking at this going, what the Christ is this? So, and when you dig into the facts and figures, this is then when, the shit really hits the fan, because first of all, there was this voting power that Nueman wanted to give himself, or that was given himself, for he had over half the voting power. Now, as you say, this did happen with Facebook and Google, but Facebook and Google were different propositions altogether. They were tech startups that were very much dominant in their own category. They had nobody that was close to them. They had these network effects, scalable business models, as I said, dominating their own sectors. And investors are willing to go, yeah, I'm willing to give them half the voting rights because I know I'm going to make money off this. They were looking at WeWork and they weren't going to give them that kind of break at all. They were saying, no way. There was also in the disclosures, the fact that WeWork paid Adam Neuman 5.9 million for the word "we" that he had trademarked. that he owned property that would earn him 235 million by leasing it back to WeWork, so a clear case of self-dealing. That he had sold, in the lead up to the IPO, he had sold $700 million worth of shares. Now, an awful lot of founders, when it comes to the IPO, when it does float, they tend to offload a bit of stock so they can take a bit of cash back.
After they're locked in for a period of time,
exactly.
might be a year.
So he said he sold $700 million before the IPO, which did raise concerns about his faith in the business. There was also the the Financial Times had it at 1.9 billion in losses. In their filing, they had a 1.6 billion in losses. There was a huge controversy around how WeWork presented their accounting and how they accounted for their EBITDA. That's not a different story, but that can get very technical. But it was very circumspect in a way how they reported their accountings and their profits and losses. What's even more astounding, Keith, you talked about the long-term leases. They were on the hook for $47 billion in long-term lease obligations, with only $4 billion in tenant commitments.
Terrifying.
Yeah. And I mean, the laughable things within this, they put their market size potential at $3 trillion because they counted everyone who worked at a desk in any city where they had a location as a potential customer. And like these, it just drew ridicule. It would like people were just laughing at this by this stage. And they had the line, here's the line. I mean, if you're an investor, would this make you invest in WeWork? We have a history of losses, and especially if we continue to grow at an accelerated rate, we may be unable to achieve profitability for the foreseeable future. What's amazing, Keith, is that, again, their investors would have reviewed this document. And these are savvy investors, apparently, a lot of them. And they were looking at this document for a 37-page photo shoot and with these facts and figures and quotes in there. And they were going, yeah, go for it. I just don't understand this.
Yeah, back to Isaacson then, maybe it's the reality distortion field that makes Neuman similar to Steve Jobs.
Yeah, maybe, because I'm looking at this and I'm kind of going, I don't know how this got anywhere close to where it got in.
And they would have had a bank underwriting it, I would assume.
Oh, I bet you, well, I'm sure JP Morgan did. They did invest 150 million into it after all. The word technology appeared 110 times in the filing. But of course, there was nothing to back up the technology aspect of it. And the much touted We operating system that Adam Neuman kept on spouting on about, where he said that they are selling services like insurance and software. Where they're selling services like software and insurance, that only accounted for 5% of their revenue. So there's nothing behind that either. And of course, on the back of all this, once the S1 filing was put out, the media just started, zeroing in on WeWork, and all these stories started coming out. There was the infamous hotbox incident where Nueman and his friends flew over to Israel and they turned their private jet into what is called a hotbox. It was so full of marijuana smoke that the flight crew had to wear oxygen masks, and they then left a huge amount of grass behind, hidden in a cereal box. So the pilots and the flight crew could have been charged with transporting drugs, and they were refused to fly them back. It also pointed out there was also the story of Rebecca Neuman demanding that certain employees be fired if she felt that their energy was, in inverted commas, off. It pointed to glaring nepotism, a weak board, weak oversight. It was just a shit show. And within a few weeks, the valuation had dropped to 20 billion. By November, it had dropped to 9 billion and the IPO was called off. And it left Softbank and the investors with a difficult kind of paradox, because Neuman was the guy who sold the vision. He sold a vision that was far grander than a real estate company. And without him to sell it, it's not going to reach the valuation and they're not going to be able to raise the money. Yet at the same time, he had no credibility.
He's the heart of the problems.
Yeah, there was no credibility at all. They couldn't keep on with him, so they had to sack him. And they put a real estate executive in charge. Now, Neuman's once 22% stake that had been worth 10.6 billion, and his hope, as he expressed at one stage, to become the world's first trillionaire, was no longer going to happen. But he still got, Keith, 1 billion for his shares.
Billion.
A billion for his shares, 185 million consulting contract, other cash incentives, and together with the 700 million shares that he sold pre-IPO, he came out of it with a net worth of about 2 billion. So
Not too bad.
not too bad, and I'm sure it left a very bitter taste in the mouths of the thousands of employees who were let go on the back of the failed IPO. And this whole idea that, Neuman extolled about, we're a community and we're all in this together. And look, I don't expect any CEO to be sharing their, funds with their employees. But Neuman, he peddled a certain kind of shtick. He was all on for this. We're all in this together. And yes, when it all went to shit and he got his 2 billion, he didn't help anybody else. Community went out the door as soon as, it all went to shit. So I'm not a fan of his. But WeWork itself, just to see how it all ended up, they brought in a new CEO, cost cutting, layoffs, they scaled back their properties from 500 to 330 locations, and he rightly positioned it as a straightforward office renting company. They floated in 2021 with a valuation still of 9 billion, still way overvalued. This is in the middle of the pandemic. IWG at this stage was valued at 2.9 billion. So still 3 times the valuation of IWG. And of course...
And the pandemic, nobody wants to be sitting in a shared office space.
No.
That's really interesting.
No. But what is interesting is the pandemic worked out well for them in the end, because they filed for bankruptcy in 2023 because they were way down with 10 billion in lease obligations and 15 billion due again in 2028. But because of the pandemic and because now landlords were in such dire straits, when it came to renegotiating their contracts, they were in a stronger position to kind of say, well, who else have you got to rent your office space? And we want to renegotiate our prices down, whatever. Nueman actually tried to buy it back from bankruptcy for 500 million, but it was rejected. And a software company called Yardi purchased WeWork for 450 million. And in 2024, when I looked at it, Keith, just before we recorded, it had a market cap of 41 million. Now, I think that's probably way undervalued at the moment, but it's probably as a result of all the bad reputation and everything. So Softbank ended up losing 10 billion and other investors lost between 4 to 6 billion. So 16 billion in total was lost in WeWork. But you can't keep a good man down, Keith, because Adam Neuman is back at it again. He's got a company called Flow. Okay, so this is a new venture. I got a quote from him here, and he's just kind of going, what's happening here? A new venture aiming to reshape residential housing. And he managed to raise 350 million from Andreessen Horowitz in 2022. And this is a quote from Neuman as to what Flow is all about. Okay. What if we use technology to operate the systems better, bring people who are all about hospitality and run an apartment the way you'd expect the Four Seasons to run with that level of hospitality? Now, the problem here is that the Four Seasons and similar brands offer precisely this type of model with their branded residences. And in terms of innovation, what they have, from what I can gather, is an app that helps people for buzzing in guests or requesting maintenance. That's it. And Andreessen Horowitz, who invest in tech companies, again, it's like this is deja vu all over again. How is he managing to do this? They spent over $1 billion buying 3,000 units in Fort Lauderdale, Miami in 2024, and they're in the process of opening up about 1,000 units in Saudi Arabia. I'm scratching my head at this. I'm kind of going, what are investors thinking? Like, he already did this before. He already sold an office rental space as a tech company with no foundation.
And now he's doing it again. Yeah,
and now he's doing it again with, again, no tech foundation at all, but selling it as a tech company. I'm just scratching my head. I mean, the whole thing that it shows to me is that there's this, he's good at creating an environment that creates this, what is a FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yes.
Like, that's what people are buying into, that he manages to convince them that I'm onto something big here. And the
mystique and the spirituality, the messianic sort of figure.
Yeah, and you kind of think, like, to be able to sell it that way, does Neuman actually believe his own bullshit? That's what I'm wondering. Like, does he actually? I don't think he does, because he actually, he activated the space. He fabricates an environment to entice people in. And also, if he did believe his own bullshit, if he really did believe in this whole, we're in this together, we're a community and all that.
Double down and invest your own money back in.
I think he has invested some of his own money. But you'd also, if you really believed in community and really believed that we're creating a new universe, he would have helped people with all the money he made. What about all his employees? Where did community go when it all went to shit and he worked off with $2 billion? And I did research, Keith, and I found articles where Alan Neuman basically said, well, they took a risk and it didn't work out for them, and I feel sorry that it didn't. And you're kind of going, no, they didn't take a risk. They bought into your idea of community, and you told them that you're all in this together, and you told them that this is a new world order, and you told them all this. And yes, your actions speak louder than words, because when it all went to shit, you walked away and you didn't give a shit about community, So I found it fascinating, but I have a massive dislike for the kind of bullshit he peddles.
Yeah. Hell of a job, though.
Yeah.
Hell of a I'm sticking with my assessment that he's an amazing sales guy.
Oh, he obviously is. But you know what? No, I think Steve Jobs is an amazing sales guy. Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs did more than just sell. Not that he made the iPhone, but he pushed people to create this fantastic product, and then he sold it brilliantly.
Yeah.
Adam Neumann built something and sold it as something completely different. So that's why I wouldn't call him an amazing. I'm sticking to my point that he's an amazing bullshitter. But a great story.
Cool.
All righty. I'll have one for next time.
Disagree. Cool. All right.
See you, Keith.
See you. Good luck.
Good luck. Bye.